Today's podcast is supported by David Smith of Edward Jones. Are you happy with your financial strategy? Or maybe like to see what other opportunities are out there? Well, give David a call at 469-372-1587. That's 469-372-1587. David is only concerned about one person, that's you and your financial health. So check him out, David Smith, Edward Jones, 469-372-1587. It's the Trout. Hope you're having a great day. We have a great episode on the Trout Show this time. We have one of the most preeminent, famous blues guitar players in the world, international star Walter Trout. Walter sat down and talked to me about his career, his life story, the ups and downs, the equipment he plays, and just about everything what makes this guy a phenomenal blues player. I love talking to him because I'm a blues guy too. And if you want to know about the blues artistry of Walter Trout and his history and where he's going from this point on, he just keeps making records all the time and touring all the time. Stay tuned for this episode of The Trout Show. So up next, the guy that makes the blues sing, Mr. Walter Trout, on The Trout Show. That's next. Here's my first question for you. First off, I think you are the most tenacious human being on the planet as far as a musician, because I look at your schedule. When I talked to John months ago, I looked at your schedule. Anytime I reach out to somebody of your caliber, I always look and see where they're touring. Dude, you never stop. I mean, but that's not my real question. I just look at it and go, he just keeps going. He's like the Energizer Bunny. But let's go back to the beginning, because I can tell you when it happened to me, but tell me when you first realized the blues was something that really, what age were you when you went, oh man, I think I'm into this? Or where did you see, I noticed you played with some very major, well-known players when you first started out. When did that hit you and go, this is something I want to do, or play the blues?
You know, my guitar odyssey has sort of three phases. I was a kid. I took trumpet lessons. I was going to be a jazz trumpet player. I was a very good trumpet player. I played it actually all through high school in the band and the marching band.
Right.
And but when I was 10 years old, my brother, and I got to go back and say I really loved big band jazz and Mingus,
Oh,
and when
okay.
I was 10 years old, I even got to spend the day with Duke Ellington, hang
Oh,
out with
wow. That's cool.
him. And so that was my focus. And but then I was 10 years old, and my older brother, who's 5 years older, came home and he goes, there's something about this guy. I need you to hear this. This is very different than what you're into, but I want you to check this guy out. And
Mhm.
it was the first album by Bob Dylan. And something about it grabbed me in a way that nothing else really had up to
Wow.
that point.
Yeah.
And I realized listening to it, because I'd been listening to very complex big band music
Hmm.
and John Coltrane and Eric Dolphy and stuff, right? And
Yeah.
here was these very simple 3 chord songs, but with all this feeling and messaging, all these things that needed to be said over just these simple musical progressions, but with these beautiful melodies. And I was just taken by it. And it wasn't long after that, once again, my brother comes home and says, hey, this guy just gave me this guitar. I think you probably want it, don't you? And I said, sure. And I just got a chord book and started learning chords, the Mel Bay
I
chord
was going to
book.
say Mel Bay had to be Mel Bay because that's what
It
I
was
had
Mel
too.
Bay. Yeah,
Yeah, Mel Bay.
exactly. I sat with Mel Bay and I started figuring out these Bob Dylan songs. And that was cool. That was like 1961 or 62. 1964, February the 9th, Sunday night, 8 o'clock, Channel 2 in Philadelphia. You know what I'm going to say. The
Yeah.
Beatles on Ed Sullivan.
Yes, sir.
And it was like my world changed at that point. And I'm like, I've got to get an electric guitar now. And I've got to start learning these kind of songs. And I've got to be in a band because I looked at that. I looked at them on TV, and it was almost like they were one person.
Mm-hmm.
It was so weird the impact they had when they came out. It's
Mm-hmm.
hard to explain to people now, but I
I
was
know
30,
it is
I
hard,
was
very hard. They don't
30
understand.
years old,
Yeah.
and I'm like, okay, I know what I want to do. So I got an electric guitar, a cheap Japanese guitar. Actually, it was the first one I had. You'll know it exactly. Was the silver tone with the speaker in the case, right?
Sears Roebuck and Co.
Yeah, yeah, and it was cool. And then once again in 1965, when I've been listening to guitar solos by George Harrison and Keith Richards and great players, but that's what I'm thinking are guitar solos. My brother brings home another album and says, I'm going to play this for you, but you need to sit down because when you hear this guitar player, you might fall over.
Wow.
And it was Michael Bloomfield. It was the first Paul Butterfield album with
Yeah.
Born in Chicago. And at that point, I went to my mother and I said, I know what I want to do now. And I said, you hear that sound that this album has? I want to make that sound. And I had found my calling at that point, you know. So there was 3 phases there. And all of them really were, my brother was instrumental. He was a music fan, loved everything. And he was always bringing home records. Check this out. And, it was, for a while, I was really, I hate to say a blues purist because I think a lot of the purists probably hated what Bloomfield was doing because he was playing blues but with rock and roll aggression and fire and energy.
Right.
He was aggressive, man. He was right in your face, and he was playing these it was unbelievable at that point. If you listen to that album now, and you realize that when he was playing those solos, the solos we were hearing were like on "Can't Buy Me Love" and "This Could Be the Last Time," stuff like that,
yeah, the
right?
Stones, yeah.
He was ahead of his time back then, and so that really that pointed me in a direction.
I think it's interesting. I can remember when I got exposed to it by the Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
Because they did Little Red Rooster on their whatever album it was.
Yeah.
And I said, "What is this?" And they're telling me it's all American blues. And I went, "Oh, wait a minute. I kind of like this."
Yeah.
And I remember, and being a couple years younger than you, but I started playing when I was 12. And like you, I wanted to get in the band right away, which I did. Of course, back then, none of us were probably very good, I imagine. Couldn't be very good. But it really hit me when, B.B. King brought out The Thrill Is Gone. And I got into it then, and I started then studying, as I got a little bit older, the whole history of it.
Yeah.
Robert Johnson and all that stuff. And I'd sit there and listen to the old stuff, and then the Stones put out a couple other things that they did. A lot of other stuff was kind of 3-chord blues stuff, but and now that's what you do for a living. I mean, and the questions I have, when I talk to musicians, I try to ask them something different that you get asked all the time. What's your favorite key to play in? Everybody has a favorite key. If I said, let's do a jam, and what key would you play it in?
I would probably call E or A.
I'm an A guy. So you'd be, either one. Yeah.
Either one. Yeah. Another thing that happened also with this is I would get magazines where there would be interviews with people like the Stones and people like Butterfield and Mike Bloomfield.
Right.
And they would talk about where they got the music. They'd mention Howlin' Wolf, Chester Burnett, they'd mention Muddy Waters, and they'd mention these people. And then I would go out and seek those people out. Now, I do have to preface this by saying that my father, who was a music lover, back in the late 50s in New Jersey, in the suburbs, he had records by B.B. King and John Lee Hooker. And my mother had all the Ray Charles Atlantic stuff when Ray Charles was basically doing blues, R&B stuff before his kids. Yeah. So my parents and my dad had a bunch of T-Bone Walker stuff. But I was hearing that as a kid, but it wasn't getting me. It was when I heard that music played by Bloomfield with that rock and roll energy, that's what knocked me over,
I think the album that I have is I don't have any more. Super Sessions, isn't that the one that Bloomfield played on with Al Cooper and Shuggy Otis? I always wondered what happened to Shuggy Otis.
I don't know.
I never did know what happened to.
It's funny you mention that because I decided in my senior year of high school that I had to go get a really good guitar. And on the back of the Butterfield album, there was a picture of Mike Bloomfield with a Telecaster. Okay.
Oh, wow. I thought he played Les Paul.
Telecaster in Philadelphia, and I could get a Telecaster back then for like $180. So I got an after-school job and was saving my money to get a Telecaster. And then when I just about had enough, out came Super Session.
Yeah.
On the cover, he had a Les Paul.
I was going to say he had a Les Paul.
So I'm like, oh, boy. I went to see a Les Paul, and it was like $50 more expensive. So I had to work another couple of weeks, And then I went out and got myself a Les Paul. That's what I started on.
So what was your first amp, though? You had to play it through something?
I had a Fender Super Reverb. Actually, no, it was a Pro Reverb. And in South Jersey,
what speakers does that have in it?
It's like a Super, but it only has 2 10s.
2 10s, okay.
Yeah. But it's a legendary amp in South Jersey because our cat climbed into the back of the amp and gave birth. And the little cats, the little kittens, and the mom kind of lived in the back of the amp, and all the bodily fluids and all went into the amp. And I finally got them out of the amp, but I never cleaned it. And when the amp would get hot, it would start to stink. And I sold it to a guy back there, and he still has it, and it's known among all my friends and musicians back there as the cat shit amp.
You probably cranked that baby up to try to get some distortion out of it. You had to. You wanted to get past that Fender sound. There was no pedals back then. We didn't have any pedals,
No, pedals didn't exist. It's funny, there's a photographer in Las Vegas, a very fine photographer, Denise Trusello, and she's taken album covers for people like Celine Dion. But she had a 1949 little Fender amp that's about this big, and it's tweed, and it was hand built by Leo Fender.
Oh wow!
And it's all original. It's got the original speaker. It's got She gave that to me, and I'm scared to use it.
Oh yeah,
because if I blow up that original speaker, what do you do? And I've had guys say, "Well, bring it in the studio, man. And I'm like, "No, it's. I have it actually locked up safe."
I was going to say it's worth a lot of money. I mean, it's, for a collector, I mean, that's what I wouldn't want to play it. I mean, that's one of those pieces that you look at, and it's like an antique. I mean, it's an antique, but it's like a Monet painting. You just kind of look at it and go, wow, this Leo Fender actually built this. I mean,
and it's got a couple
with his little magnifying glasses
on the top where a guy laid his cigarette on the top.
Yeah, the old, yeah. The other thing about you, Walter, I think is really interesting is, to me, as a fellow musician, but your life has been not an easy life. And I look, and I don't mean this, I look at your history and I say, God bless you that you're still with us. I mean, seriously.
I'm not sure how I'm still here.
And you're not done yet.
Every moment, and you talk about tenacious. I am a driven artist. It's what I love to do. Sure. It's what I long to do. It's my calling. I've really known since I was 10 that I was put here to play music. I wasn't sure what kind of music until I found my way. But I had a liver transplant and pretty much was close to death 8 years ago. Yeah. And in the succeeding 8 years since I came back, I've done 6 albums, and so yeah, I'm just driven and I love it. And I just did a tour in Europe where I did 43 cities in about 52 days. And
I see your schedule. Like I said earlier, I see your schedule, and it's amazing to me, because the fact is that you get to a point in your life, and I think this is what's interesting about musicians. Everybody I talk to, every single person has that bug that we get when we're young. And some people are very young, 4 or 5 years old. Some people are 17, but they're all young. We get that thing, and if you don't have it, nobody understands it. But when you got it gnaws at you all the time. I got to keep playing. I got to do this. I just love doing it. I want to do this all the time. And that's the one thing. But you, because of your because of your history, I look at you as somebody. It's like, here's everything he's been through, and he still gets up and whips that Strat on and still plays blues, because he's driven to do exactly that. And that, my friend, is why I like listening to your music, because I love what you put into it. I know that you're never doing anything pedestrian. Every time I've seen you on YouTube, I just go, when you hit it, you hit it. And that just, because I know how hard it has to be doing those many dates. Probably sometimes you forget where you are,
Oh yeah.
And it's like, and every time you walk on stage, you have to do the best you can, no matter what your situation is.
Of course.
And that's what gets me. I tell people that start out in the music, I said, when you go in the music business, it doesn't matter what happened to you that day. Those people paid to see you. They want to see what the best thing you can give to them. Yeah. And so I'm sure there's days that people, no matter who you are that's on tour, you just go like, oh man, how am I going to do this? But you got to drive. And so I admire you for that, and I hope you keep doing it so I can keep listening to you. That's
Well, I want to keep doing it till I can't do it anymore.
Gotcha.
And right now, I'm still going. My wife, who's managed my career for 30 years, we just had a Zoom meeting yesterday with the head of my record label, and she just signed a deal for me to do my 31st album.
That's great.
So I've just started sitting down and writing that thing. And, this coming up next week, I have this blues cruise where I'm going to have the great experience of getting to do 2 songs fronting B.B. King's old band.
Oh, I was wondering about, yeah.
And then I come home for a week, and then I go back and do this thing called the Rock Legends Cruise with Deep Purple and Roger Daltrey. And, I love it. It is, and you will, I think, being a musician, you'll understand this. Sometimes when you're playing, especially in front of a crowd, you can hit a point where you lose all knowledge that you have a physical body, and you just become this sound.
Yeah.
And you're flying through the universe. I'm going to lose it here talking about it, but you don't achieve it all the time, but you strive for it.
Yeah.
And I get up there every night and I strive for that experience.
Yeah.
And it's not always, you're not always going to get there.
No.
But the striving, the pushing yourself to achieve that keeps me going, because that is, I hate to call it a religious experience, but it's a spiritual experience.
It is. And it's the one thing hard that there's 2 things about it. One, you can't explain it to people if they don't do it. They can't, I've told friends of mine, I said, I wish you could experience what I do. I mean, experience that moment. And then this number 2 is you never know when it's going to come.
Yes.
I mean, you could play with the same, and I mean, you play with the same guys all the time. And then there's this one night that something magical happens that you just kind of float out in the ether a little bit, and you're like above everybody kind of doing your thing. And you're like, wow, that was so freaking.
Yeah. Yeah. And that inspiration, when that hits, it is indescribable to people. And it's just something that's the most beautiful experience I can have in my life.
And I'm thankful when I have the ability to play. I tell people it's a gift that you get, and you get the gift, in my opinion, is you're given it, but then you have to work at it to make it better.
Oh yeah.
I mean, So when did you kind of decide? Every time I see you, you're a Strat guy. You obviously started on different things. When did you kind of just say that's the thing that I want to play all the time?
Well,
or what was the moment? I mean, what made you drive that to that point and play a Strat instead of a Les Paul or a Tele?
Well, back in '68, I had purchased that Les Paul. I wanted a really good guitar. I had a succession of cheap guitars, and I was starting to really play in bands a lot, and I wanted a good guitar. And so I had gotten the Les Paul.
Right.
I was playing the Les Paul in my bedroom, practicing, and I dropped it, and the neck split in 2. The headstock was off. So I went out and I got a 335.
Oh,
because I had gone and seen Freddie King, and he had.
I saw Freddie once. Yeah,
sounded badass, right?
Yep.
So I got a 335, and I was at a jam session in Philly one night back in like 1971, maybe, and this guy, I remember his name was Bill Brown. I don't know why I remember that, but he came over, and it was just a party at a guy's house. We were all jamming. He said, "Try my Stratocaster." And I put on
a Stratocaster. Isn't that funny to hear that?
It was the way it fit my body. It was like a woman. The 335 was kind of awkward and uncomfortable, and the Strat just fit. It was like, oh boy, this is nice. And I started playing it and I thought, okay, I have found my woman here. And I went out and got a Strat and never looked back.
What's the oldest one you have?
I have one that I bought one in New Jersey, and before I moved out here, it had gotten damaged. So when I moved out here, all I had was the 335.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to get a Strat. So 2 weeks after I got here, I went out and bought a Strat, a 1973, and that's the oldest one I have. I'm not into all this vintage.
No. I was in a band in the '80s, and a guy he lent me his pre-CBS Strat, and in the '80s is when the Japanese started buying them and sticking them on their walls. Yeah, and I was changing the strings on it, and I looked at it and went, oh my gosh, the guy was a country player, and he'd rusted the bridge and all that stuff, but I wanted it because it was pre-CBS Strat. He wouldn't, and he wore a belt buckle, so he scratched the whole back of it up, but he wouldn't sell it to me. I've always been a Les Paul guy because I like sustain. Although there's a Strat like behind me that I use when I record because I do like the single coil pickups, but so, I'm a guy that wants to hold a note forever. And get that 15 pounds on you, that's another thing. Of course, you play so much and the Strat's so much lighter. That's another thing, too. It doesn't have as much weight.
I have to tell you, that old Strat of mine, I can't use it anymore because it's heavier than my Les Paul, and I do have a Les Paul.
Yeah.
And I actually now I'm using there's a company in Texas called Delaney Guitars. It's Michael Delaney. And he makes a Walter Trout signature model that he is based on my old Strat. He actually came out to my house and took a lot of measurements of the neck, and he makes a Delaney Walter Trout signature model. But it is the one that he has made for me because my old Strat destroyed my shoulder. I had to go into therapy. I had to get all sorts of therapy. My left hand stopped working. All the nerves in this side of my body were all messed up. And so Michael has built me a beautiful signature model guitar that weighs something like 4 pounds.
Oh, wow.
I don't know how he did it, but you can lift it with your pinky, and that's what I use now.
Let me ask you a question, and I'm going to talk about your latest album. But I'm always curious about, and I want to not get into details with it, but you said you're going to start writing. So for the next album that you're going to start working on, tell me a little bit about your process. I mean, I have to be, do you sit down and go, I think I'm going to write a blues song, or are you just kind of outside and all of this? How does it all kind of works for you?
I sit down with a guitar, acoustic or electric, and I just start playing around, playing some licks, playing some stuff. Suddenly a melody might come into my head. Maybe I'll be laying in bed and a bunch of lyrics might pop into my head, and I grab my phone and I record them into the phone. I have a song on my new album called Ghosts.
I heard part of it.
Basically, I was in my house in Denmark during the pandemic, and I would be laying there, and sometime I was thinking about that I had been driving and I had heard a Beatles song, and it had brought back all these memories of when I was a kid and heard that song, and suddenly I was back in the room, and some of the memories are not so good.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah,
and sometimes I hear a familiar song, it brings back a memory. I said that into the phone. And then about 10 minutes later, I'm laying there trying to go to sleep, and in pops, I close my eyes, it don't take long, ghosts appear to me. I went, God, it rhymes. I want to go to bed now. And then in my heart, in my mind, teardrops on my cheek, unforgiving and so unkind, they begin to speak. I'm like, okay, here we go. And over the course of about an hour and a half, I had all the lyrics to the song, and they were all, because I wanted to go to sleep, but they just kept popping into my head, and then it was a matter of the next day I got up and I wrote them down. They all rhymed. I'm like, now I need some music for
Yeah, you got to
this.
put
And
some music to it. Yeah.
pretty easy, you know?
Well, I think the one that I haven't listened to the whole album yet, but the ride, we were talking about that earlier. Based on the, you had the kid in there with it playing the guitar, but was that a song that came to you that had any bearing on your real life? Or because I really like the tune because it's an upbeat, up tempo song. And it starts out with that train sound, that harmonica, whoever was playing that with the little,
That was me.
was that you? I love
Yeah.
that sound. And then you start
I
playing.
was, you know what? I was the harmonica player in Canned Heat for 3 years.
Well, I knew you played with him. I didn't know you played the harmonica. That's interesting.
Yeah. That song, you asked if it's real.
Well, I mean, is it life, something about your life, or you just said something about you saw a train?
I'll explain it.
Okay.
My parents divorced when I was 6. My mother married a fellow, a very nice guy. I thought he was a great guy, very literate, poetic. But it turned out, unbeknownst to us, he had been a prisoner of war of the Japanese in World War II, and he had been tortured and beaten, and he came home from the war in 1945, and they didn't know about PTSD, and he was told, suck it up and be a man, get a job. He became an insurance salesman. He married my mother, but he carried these demons, and he would start drinking, and he would get incredibly violent. Things like chopping my brother and I are in bed in our bedroom. We shared a room, and he comes up and chops the door down with an axe because he's going to kill us. And my brother holds him off with a shotgun, and I jump out the window and run into the woods. This kind of stuff.
Yeah, wow.
And we lived in this big house, and the music became, okay, the story of that is right next to this big house, Laurel Springs, New Jersey, was railroad tracks. And it was the freight trains that went between Philadelphia and Atlantic City, and they went all day and all night.
Sure they did.
And it was right there. And like it says, it shook the house and it shook the bed. The whole house would shake, the bed would shake. And when we first moved in that house, it really got to me. It made me nuts. But then I started dreaming about I could escape the situation I was in, because that's where, like, the thing with the chopping down the bedroom door, really a lot of violence and a lot of terror for a little kid. Horror
sure.
for
Absolutely.
a little kid.
Yeah.
And it just went and went. And I would think all I got to do is cross the street, hop on one of those freight trains, and I can escape. And the train represented escape to me. Now, I never did it. At this point, I was like 10 years old. But I would dream about it, And again, it would be my brother. I'd say, hey, I'm 10, he's 15. I'd say, hey, let's get on the train. He'd say, Walt, we're going to end up in the train yard in Philly going, what now? He was the
smart one. He was the smart one.
Yeah, he was the practical one. I was the dreamer, right?
Yeah.
And so that's another one that I had written the lyrics on a piece of paper years ago as a poem. I was thinking about that house, and I had just sat down and written a poem about that house. And all I did was I found those lyrics and I put it to music. But that video was my wife's idea, and she was basically in charge of the whole thing. And that kid represents me as a kid.
Yeah.
And if you watch it, you see his parents off in the distance fighting and arguing, and he just picks up a guitar and sits in his room and plays. And
I do remember that now.
Escape.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And so that video is actually me trying to come to terms with that kid, because that whole album, if you start listening to it, 90% of that album is me still trying to come to terms with what I went through as a kid. Hey Mama is a conversation I had with my mom, because a lot of people my wife, some of my friends from back then go, well, maybe your mom should have done more to protect you.
Yeah.
You know,
It's a
and
different time back then. It's different.
but also the thing was, and I understood her because he was a great guy, and it would only happen when he would get drunk. And
Yeah.
even with all that was happening, I still understood the guy, and I still cared for the guy.
Yeah.
Because I understood that he needed help. He
Sure.
couldn't deal with what he'd been through, and my heart went out to him, but I was scared to death of the man, right?
Yeah.
But I understood, and there's another song of mine. I've written a few about it. There's a song called Collingswood, and the last verse of Collingswood, I'm going to try to tell you the verse and not break down. It was so long ago, but it still affects me. Sometime I wake up in a sweat and I lay there remembering that small boy as scared and lost as I could get. Out of the darkness comes a vision. I wonder what it is I see.
Mm.
I realize it's the spirit of my mama, and she wraps her arms around me and she says, it's all right. And so that whole album, Ride, if you start listening to the lyrics of the songs with this in mind, most of them are about my childhood. I didn't set out to do that.
No. It just, it's interesting to me because the fact that had such an impact on you here years later, you're still talking about it. I mean, it still affects you, and it's that's those deep-seated memories that people don't understand. And I think a lot of times that people, when you write a song, sometimes it doesn't have any meaning. It's just a song about whatever. But when it has a meaning, people don't, sometimes they don't understand. But I mean, when you go into, and you tell me like that about that song, I listen to it completely different now. I listen to it completely, now I watch it again and go, okay, I'll just, it's a completely different meaning. And I just, that's the part about songwriting that is so cool, because you can express things that you wouldn't sit down and really tell anybody. Because it's like you said, the lyrics came to you laying in bed. I've had lyrics come to me in the weirdest places, and I'll just go, and you'll just, I got to write those down.
Now, when you're watching that video now, and you realize that kid is playing the part of me as a kid, when we start jamming together, we're not looking at each other. And then there's a moment in the video where we look right at each other and we smile. And that is me accepting certain things.
Wow.
And this was all my wife's idea. And that kid is a local kid. And it's his parents, portraying his parents in there. And
that's
he
cool.
plays guitar, and he's actually, his dad's brought him over here, and he and I have sat and played together a couple of times. But he lives like 2 blocks away. And
that's sweet. That's nice of you to do that. I mean, to give that situation where you can help, young artists coming up.
And we just played a local gig here at the local concert hall down the road here, and I got the kid up on the stage and introduced him to the crowd. Okay, all of you have seen the video. Here he is.
They probably wanted to talk to him. Hey, come over here and tell me about it. Yeah. What's it like to be on a video with Walt Trout? That kind of thing. When I look at your schedule on your website, do you tour more in Europe than you do in America?
Well, it varies from year to year.
Okay.
I just did that long tour in Europe where I did the 43 cities and 8 or 9 countries.
Right.
I'm about to do these 2 cruises that'll leave out of Florida. Then I get home from that at the end of February, and I'm going to start a 3-week run in the States up to Portland and Seattle.
Oh, that side. Okay.
And then Vancouver, and then British Columbia and Idaho and Salt Lake City and Arizona. And I'll get home from that. And then in April, I'm going to start work on my 31st album.
That's
And
cool.
then in May, I'm going to do a month in Europe again. I'll start in the UK and go back to Germany and Switzerland and where am I going? I think Poland, and I'm not sure where, but
You just
um,
get there. Here you go, honey. Just keep getting on the bus. We're going here tomorrow. We're going here
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah. So yeah, and then in August, they're already starting to book me gigs in the States. So I'll be touring the States again, in the summer, and it's what I do, and I just this I'm driven,
Well, that's obvious. You love what you do, and it shows. Not just because you're doing a lot of dates; it shows when you play. I mean,
Now, I don't know if you're aware that when I had the liver transplant, I was in the hospital for 8 months.
I saw
I
that.
lost 120 pounds. I lost the ability to speak. I didn't recognize my wife or my kids, and I had brain damage. And they saved my life, and they gave me the transplant. I was in bed for 8 months.
It just, yeah.
And after I got out, I hadn't used my legs in 8 months. I was in a wheelchair, and I had to get physical therapy and learn how to walk and how to stand up. I had to get speech therapy and learn how to speak again. And then when I came home, I sat on the couch, and one of my kids handed me a Stratocaster, and I realized I had no idea how to do it. It had been wiped clean from my memory.
Well,
I didn't know how to play a G chord. So I didn't know what to do. I was telling my wife, well, I'm good with an espresso machine. Maybe I can get a gig at Starbucks. What am I going to do? And she said, well, you have to start over again.
yeah.
And so I sat on the couch and I taught myself from scratch the same way I did when I was 10. I worked on it 6 or 7 hours a day, every day
Wow.
for a year, and it came back.
That
Um, then I wanted to see what it would be like trying to play a gig because I had not been. I'm a guy who's been on a stage
your
just
whole
about
life.
every night for the
Yeah.
last 40, 45, 50 years,
Right.
right? I
Yeah.
hadn't been on a stage in over 2 years. And instead of going down to the local pub to see what would happen, I went to Royal Albert Hall in London. And when we're done here, if you give me your email, I'll send you a clip of my return
Oh
to this.
yeah.
It was very emotional. And
Yeah. I had to see that. I mean, I did see where you replayed the Royal Albert Hall, but I didn't know it was right after all that.
that was the first time I'd been on stage in 2 years, and my wife introduced me. And
I did see that.
it was
I read about it. I didn't see it. I just read about it.
yeah, okay. It was so I mean, and so it took me after getting out. I had the transplant May the 26th of 2014. I played in June of 2015, just over a year later. I played at Royal Albert Hall, and then I started making albums again. And in the 8 years, I've done 6. I'm a driven guy, but I love it. I want to contribute. This is the only thing I have that I can contribute to the world to try to make it a little bit better. This is all I have to give is music, and I
No,
want to
you
give
have
it.
more than that. You have more than that. You have a life story that tells people don't give up. I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, seriously. I mean, I can't imagine as as good a player you are, not being able to play and forgetting it completely. I can't imagine that. And then sitting there and like a kid doing it over and over again to try to bring back that muscle memory that you had before. But so you really are kind of people can look up to you all the time about your playing. There's no doubt about that. You're a great player. I love listening to you. But then your life is a story that tells people that, as I said at the beginning, you have tenacity. You don't give up. And people just give up too easily. Oh, it's really hard. look at this guy. This guy's been through everything. I mean, he's been drugs, alcohol. You know, he had his liver replaced. He couldn't play guitar. And guess what? He didn't just go, oh, I'm going to give up. You kept going.
Well, and you get one shot, right? Might as well make the best of it, you know?
It's one shot. I tell people, I said, it's right. What did my friend say one time? This is not dress rehearsal. This is the real thing. You don't get, you get another one like that. What are you using now as your main amps? What do you take on with when you go to?
I have been a Mesa Boogie guy since I was with John Mayall.
Okay.
And I think Mesa Boogie makes the most versatile, beautiful sounding amps. And every record I've made in my solo career has been done on a Mesa Boogie amplifier. And I always go through, I get in the studio and we start going, well, hey, let's try some different guitar sounds. Here, try that Marshall. Try that high watt. Try this, try that. And we play, and I go, no, that ain't it. You set up the boogie, would you? And as soon as we plug in the boogie, I go, that's what I sound like, you know?
Do you use any pedals at all? No. I didn't think so.
No, you just plug into the boogie, turn the gain up, and off you go.
And if a lot of the people that you have in your band have been with you for quite some time. I know your keyboard player has been with you for a long time because I've seen him in a lot of videos. Yeah. And going back to where's Paradiso? That's in the Netherlands? Where was that? Denmark?
Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's my favorite place to play on the planet, is that place.
And it's not a real big place, but it looks like a cool place to perform at.
Yeah, it holds something like 1,600.
Yeah, but that's not bad. That's pretty size.
And it's an old church from the 1800s.
I wondered what that was.
Up on the pulpit, you know?
Is that what it is? I always wondered what that was. Do people, they stand up too? They don't sit down, do they? Is there any seats?
Yeah, it's standing. It's standing. It's all wood, and you're up there on the pulpit. If you watch my videos from there, the stained glass windows are back behind.
Yeah, I always wondered about that.
It's just got a vibe in there, man, and a sound because it's all wood, you know?
Yeah, so it's not bouncing. It's sucking it up to a certain degree. The other thing, too, is I always wondered when somebody like you that on tour, you have to have really good, your sound people have to be good because you're trying to maintain the same sound all the time. And we all know that every time you play in a different place, it sounds different.
Well, I can tell you that I've had the same sound man for 31 years.
There you go. That's why. That's exactly why.
And he knows my band. And, you know, basically our first song every night is the sound check. This is what people don't understand. We do this jam for the first song, and I watch him. His name is Phil. And I watch him out there in the first 30 seconds of the first song. He's going like this. Yeah. And then he goes.
And he's done.
It's in, you know.
Yeah. So you don't go on early and do sound check. They set it up and you
know, well, the crew, the band will go down there and do line checks. And sometimes the band likes to go there in the afternoon and they'll jam and they'll do stuff, but it's not a requirement in my band. You know, because that first song,
that's your sound check.
Minute, this guy's got us dialed in, but he's done pretty much every gig I've done for 31 years.
That's why that's your sound. Well, Mr. Trout, thank you so much.
Well, this has been great, Rick. Thank you. And I'll be happy to do this again. I enjoyed this.
that's it for this episode of The Trout Show. I'd like to thank Walter Trout for spending some time with me and talking about his career. Hope you all enjoyed it. For more information about Walter, please visit his website at waltertrout.com. All his information's on there, all his social media, and more importantly, where he's going to be touring and where you can get his music. So next time, people, remember, it's only rock and roll, but I like it. See ya.